multiple mini interviews. I don't know if you've heard of that. Most of the time, you picture interviewing as one person asking you a bunch of questions. And sometimes you even have multiple people in one room. And then you have to think about, how you're responding to other people's questions, being attentive and all of that. Also, it just is a whole different experience to have yourself alone in a room with an interview, which is not uncommon, or sometimes, as I say, multiple people in a room. But these mini interviews are interesting because you have a bunch of different interviewers and each one has their own question. So that's kind of an interesting experience. And if some of you are in med school, then I presume that you've already had that kind of experience. As far as what you need to do for your shadowing, that's going to vary, I'm sure, by the situation and the particular shadowing location, most of the time hospitals, right? Okay, so at any rate, the team manager is Colleen McGuire. She is the one who sets up these sessions, and she's the one who's going to be following up by sending you an email with the slides and all of the other goodies. So be sure that you take just a minute to give the name and email address on the sign-in sheet. My name is Joan Martin, as you can see. The MA is in psychology. My undergraduate work was in psych at Harvard. My graduate work, I was in a PhD program at UCLA in psychology. And I did, the first year I got the MA, and then I did all of the years after that with the courses and the requirements and the orals and the written, all kinds of exams. And I was actually working on my dissertation when my life took an interesting turn and I decided not to go back. And so that's why I get to put only MA. They don't let you put ABD. In academia, everybody knows ABD stands for all but dissertation, but you're not officially allowed to put that. So at any rate, as I mentioned before, I am an instructor and tutor for Princeton Review with all the different grad level classes, also admission, all kinds of good stuff. But at any rate, my email address here, you're welcome to use that if you want. Now, Colleen's you're going to have because she's going to write you afterwards, but mine is here at the beginning and end of the slide deck if you decide you want to get in touch later. I'm more than happy, as I said, to answer questions during and after this session, but I'm also available to you tonight, tomorrow, next week, next year, forevermore, whatever you might think of in terms of admissions or opportunities or help with writing, whatever. Okay, no. The Go Rightly part of it is a reference to the fact that I'm a writer-editor in my other life. So that's what that's about. So they this is kind of a very, very broad overview. So if you're going into applying to medical school, which is this bottom track down here, some of you are past that point, some of you are way ahead of the future, some of you are kind of getting ready to do that. But at any rate, basically for the application of medical school, obviously you have the MCAT test, which is the name of the test, GPA, your grade point average, and some of them will ask for your science GPA and your non-science GPA, depends on the school. Okay, applications, 15 of those, lots and lots of experiences. We can touch on that later if we want to, but lots and lots of kind, very, very extensive, as you may have heard. And then after all of that stuff is in, then there's secondary essays and so forth. I'm going to show you a specific timeline for that later on in the slides. And then if you're lucky, you get an interview. There's about 53,000 applicants per year, approximately averaging 6,000 per school. So if you imagine you're applying to a med school and they've got thousands of applications to consider, you can see why it's so important that you stand out in every which possible way. And then out of all those thousands, only a few hundred will actually get the privilege of being interviewed. If you get to that point, then you know for sure you're very seriously being considered. And then out of that, a maximum of a couple of hundred will get actually.
Can you take out your headphone?
I'm sorry, can I help you? Somebody had a question?
No, I think someone just joined and had their computer unmuted.
Oh, okay. I welcome. So if you want, as I said before, Kara, if you want to go ahead and put the sign up information again for her. So at any rate, above here is other kinds of things because you may have interviews for all kinds of clinical experience. If you're applying to med school, you have to have like usually a minimum of 100, 150 hours, but most people have a lot more than that of clinical work. But research experience also, you need a year and a half of research experience. So a lot of times you have to apply for that. Sometimes you're doing it with a professor that you're working with, and so it kind of falls out naturally from that. But if you're applying for some kind of research position, then obviously it might well involve an interview and other kinds of things too, some paid internships, travel fellowships, whatever. So a lot of things come into that. So of course, if you're going to apply to things kind of that are not in the standard med school track, then there's always going to be some kind of cover letter that you're going to submit to them. Whatever you've read what they have to say, and then you're going to write a cover letter introducing yourself in an email, okay? So we'll go into a little bit more detail on that, but basically you've got to introduce yourself, and you're lucky if they take a quick look at that. But anyway, you attach a resume after that. Again, you're lucky if they even look at it, but if they do, you get 5 or 6 seconds on that one, but you've got to have it there, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. So look at it. if you're lucky. Read it if you're really, really, really lucky. Okay. And then if they're really still interested based on what they've seen so far, they may look at a link, your LinkedIn site. If you don't have LinkedIn already, probably a good idea. Also, probably a good idea to purge your social media because these days they can get access to everything you've ever put on the internet. So sometimes that could be disadvantageous. You need to know that. Some people look into that, some people don't, but you probably have heard that that's a consideration sometimes. But anyway, LinkedIn is a place to put every kind of thing that you want to have in information that anybody might ever want to know about you. We can take a look at that. But anyway, if you're lucky, also interview. Now, interviews is a kind of a privilege. I mean, you'd love to be interviewed to show them your enthusiasm, your body language, your ideas, and be able to, answer their questions and look at them and see what they're looking for, and, all that good stuff. But interviews turns out a lot of times to be a rare privilege. But gosh, if you could get one, go for it. Anyway, so as far as I mentioned before, how many applicants there are, like about 53,000 per year, averaging about 6,000 per school, a few hundred interviewed, and of that, still a smaller percentage get actually accepted. Now, these multiple mini interviews, as we said, a series of short interview stations, 3 to 12, depending on the school. Okay, so obviously you want to be objective, like subjective in the sense of your motivation and your character is not what you'd call objective, but objectivity in the course of pursuing a scientific pursuit like medicine. Obviously, you have to not be prejudiced or opinionated, and that's, I think, kind of stands to reason. Then also kinds of skills that they're looking for. Some of that will show in the written materials you submit, but when they're interviewing you, they will get very, very specific and drill in on some of that. So you need to really be ready for that kind of thing. And by the way, there's some interview tips that Colleen can send you also as a part of her extensive follow-up email. At any rate, so they're also weighing your thought process and critical thinking. So it's not just factual. They're sizing up your confidence, how you carry yourself, how you speak, thinking on your feet, being creative and knowledgeable and so forth, and critical thinking. If they ask you surprising questions, then you can field that and deal with it on the spot. At any rate, the one thing that's super important is to be yourself. People who make the mistake of thinking you're trying to, I want them to like me, so I'm going to be this kind of person. I want to look smart. I want to look, whatever. Trying to look confident could make you look arrogant if you're not careful. Trying to act like you know something you don't, very, very bad idea. These people have interviewed thousands of people and they can smell a rat from a mile away. So absolutely be authentic. Good things, bad things about you, authentic. At any rate, obviously the things they're looking at, they look at your ethics. I mean, obviously being in medicine involves ethics. You have to be taking responsibility for what you're doing as a doctor. That means ethical issues matter a lot. So they may ask you about that. I wouldn't be surprised. What are some key issues? They may ask you about what you think the key issues are, what kinds of things you've run into that challenged you to think about ethical things, right? And so you want to be very clear, very specific, defining problem, collecting information. So if you had an experience with that, how did you deal with it? How did you collect the information? What kind of decision did you make? These are just kind of very general, blobby outline things. But anyway, as far as what's going into an interview, some do's and don'ts here. We're going to, as I said, go into more specifics. But pre-interview, what do you need to think before you go into the interview? We'll touch on that a little bit. And also the appropriate background, the things that you want to share with them. Also your body language, never underestimate. They can size you up in the first 1 or 2 seconds. The way you look when you come in, the way you carry yourself, before you even open your mouth and start talking or answering questions. They can size up and get a lot of information right away. So make sure your body language and your presentation is something that people would actually want to talk to and maybe want to admit into their program. So at any rate, or dealing with spotty internet. I mean, technical problems of various sorts could arise, right? The person who's interviewing you could have a coughing fit. The email, some problem with that, yours or theirs. Some problem could happen. Okay, or a total crash could happen. You have to keep your calm, of course. And then some things to think about after the interview. I'm going to get way more specific on these, but this is, again, just kind of a preview of the topics we're going to cover. So, pre-interview. Now, I'm not going to read all this to you. You are going to have all these slides. Now, this is from AAMC, right? AAMC, American Association of Medical Colleges, the medical schools themselves constitute AAMC. AAMC is in charge of all things testing and admissions for a medical school. Okay, you sign up for your test, they write the test, they supervise the creation and scoring of the test. Okay, so you sign up there, you cancel if you want to cancel there, and there's all kinds of preparatory materials and practice materials and updates. just gold mine of information, plus the medical school, the forums that they go around the country, late summer, early fall. All that information is on that website. If you have not already got yourself a free account at aamc.org, go ahead and do that because it's wonderful stuff no matter what stage along the way you are. And you have to go there eventually. Anyway, that's where you sign up for the test. But they do have interview tools here. See, so then we got this. We copied this from the AAMC site with their video tools. So at any rate, just summarizing them. Social skills, obviously. I'm going to kind of let you read these a little bit and be quiet. If you have any kind of questions or clarifications, please ask. As far as cultural competence, I mean, you're in Southern California and so am I. I'm in Santa Monica. Talk about cultural diversity. I mean, my daughter's high school, Santa Monica High School, there were 200 languages spoken there. When you're in medicine, you're going to encounter every which kind of language and culture and attitude toward medicine and all of that, and toward death for that matter. As far as teamwork is concerned, medicine is a team effort, especially if you're doing shadowing in a hospital, you'll see that right away because there's a team that treats the person. It's not just one person. However, the doctor is the leader of the team. So you have to show teamwork, but also leadership. So when you're the leader of the team as the doctor, then they're going to look to you for that kind of setting the tone and so forth, and respecting all of them and appreciating their contributions. Obviously, reliability, dependability. Not only is that important in life in general, but certainly in medicine, for sure, life and death. You know, it's interesting with this last one, the resilience and adaptability. How do you show that? Well, one of the best ways to show that is to be upfront about challenges that you've had, right? If you had a failure, if you fell flat on your face or something was a big obstacle, how did you deal with that? Because trying to deny it, first of all, it may show up in other ways also, but it can be a major strength in your application. If instead of just always talking about things that are great about yourself, if you actually acknowledge some kind of problem that you had, the fact that you acknowledge it already shows maturity. That's kind of a rarity. Secondly, the fact that you hung in there shows your grit and determination. You didn't let it keep you down. And finally, what did you learn? Your resilience, adaptability. What did you take out of that experience? Every failure is a learning experience, and they know that. Everybody fails. They know that. But turning that into a plus can be a major addition to your personal statement and or interviews. Okay. So, as I say, if anybody has questions, please feel free to speak up. At any rate, obviously, there's 3 times to think about. If you're thinking about your current role, how you got there, where you're going next, this is kind of to give them the whole picture of yourself, past, present, and future. So don't ignore any of those in the course of talking to them. Anything anybody wants to ask about this? Now, interests outside of medicine. Now, when you're doing your application, even when you're applying to medical school, for sure, can bring up interests outside. I would say you should bring up interests outside because you want to show that you're a full, rich human being with all kinds of experiences. For example, you have to have a lot of volunteer experience, and that can be all kinds of, you could be volunteering in all kinds of ways in that, whether you're tutoring in other subjects, whether you're going abroad and doing something, service abroad, all kinds of things you can do to show that you have interest outside of just the practice of medicine. And also it sparkles up the conversation, especially if you have unusual experiences. For example, I had a student a few years ago who was from Tibet, and she had been volunteering with the Dalai Lama to fight for Tibetan human rights. And so you can bet that she's going to be not like everybody else and has some very interesting things to say. So whenever you're presenting yourself, if there's anything about yourself that's unique, find something about yourself that is unique. Obviously, with thousands of people, rare to find something truly unique, but do the best you can to stand out from the crowd. Okay, so as far as the beginning, be prepared before you even go in. Okay, so that means practicing responses ahead. Read dozens of questions, things that have been asked. Some of them kind of, you expect them standard, some of them quite surprising and shocking, but you need to not be shocked by that. You want to be ready for almost anything they can ask you. So you start as best you can to look at all the kinds of questions you can lay hands on. We'll look at some examples today, and then how you might answer that. And of course, practicing with somebody, whether it's someone like myself or in our course there, or other opportunities you have, probably within your group, I'm guessing that you do that for each other or that you bring in mentors for that. I'm just guessing. Obviously, academic background, extracurriculars, all of these are pretty normal. So if you have those ready at hand, you've for sure got all of this once you're applying for these, but you've got them ready at hand. You've reviewed them, all the details and facts and interesting things about it are right there at your fingertips. Okay, so taking your time. Oh, and by the way, let me say one more thing before this. You really want to carry, I've read this other places, have a folder with you, nothing floppy, no pages flying all around, but some kind of a folder that contains some other material that you might want to refer to. Because remember, all of those details might not be possible. But if you had some documents from your past or the resume or any kind of things you might possibly want to review, to go in there and say, I'll tell you the exact date if you give me just a second, or, whatever, that kind of thing, if you want. But having some kind of folder with you is good. But a sheaf of papers, no. You could drop it, it looks unprofessional. So part of your professional appearance is to have an actual nice looking professional folder. Makes you look more professional. I don't know if you've heard that, but that's a very common recommendation also. Okay. So as far as when you're actually in there, don't get into a rush. Of course, you're nervous. Of course, you're excited. Of course, you're under a lot of stress. But try to take breaths. Try to stay calm. Try to stay, really right with the moment and not let yourself get distracted into your head or the past or the future things that might have happened, could have happened. Just be right there, like the be here now kind of thing, right? So they will see this. Part of this is, of course, to find out information about you and to give you a chance to ask your questions too. They're asking you questions, but you need to ask the questions to them as well. Have those ready to go. But how do you react to stress? Obviously, medicine is full of stressful situations. How do you react? How do you think? How do you act? How do you speak? How do you even physically react? So they're looking at that all the time. So thinking on your feet, obviously you're sitting down most likely, but you know what that means. In other words, ready with responses. Okay. Now, if something catches you off guard, okay, don't think you just have to go right and say just count to twos. You ask a question, it shows you're thinking about it. So you're processing that, and that shows if you count to two, say speak, then it shows, as they say, thoughtful confidence. Okay. Now, if you don't understand the question, or maybe you understood it, but you're a little nervous about it, but certainly if you don't understand it exactly, then ask for clarification. Okay. Let me make sure I know what you're asking me. Also, that your own goals are well conceived and that you have the responses ready to go. Obviously, articulate and thoughtful. You have to be articulate and thoughtful. If you're going to communicate with your colleagues and with your patients, they have to understand what you're saying and have confidence in you. So you need to ask questions also, right? It's not just about they're asking you questions, which is what most of us think. But this shows that if you really want to have the best kind of interview, it's a dialogue. Of course, they're asking questions, but then you're also asking questions to them as well as answering theirs. And ideally, they're woven together to a certain extent, right? So that would be, taking into account what they've already said and feeding back into that, referring to that. So we're going to have a little bit more detail on that coming up. But at any rate, more of a conversation rather than a Q&A. At any rate, for sure, don't ask questions you could find on the website. If you're going into an interview, you need to extensively research the school that's interviewing you. They're for specific questions they're going to ask, their strengths, their mission, their goals, their faculty, all the kinds of things they might have about themselves that anybody wants to apply there might want to know about. So research them as best you can and don't ask questions that you could have found out on the website. Now, a reference to the website's okay. I noticed in your write-up on the website or whatever that you said, so-and-so, I'm wondering, and then you have some aspect of it you wanted to ask about. Now, I'm noticing that somebody's unmuted. It's not bad, but I just want to make sure nobody's trying to ask something. Just clarify that. Okay, all right. So at any rate, also you can take the opportunity to ask them questions to find out more about their faculty and their goals, research opportunities and internships and so forth. So anything you really want to know, don't hesitate to ask. First of all, you've thought it through, you know what you want, you know what you'd like to hear about. And that way it really sets up a conversation, gives them a chance to show what they've got, and you a chance to know that you know enough about it to ask the right questions. Any rate, so first impressions matter. I said this a few minutes ago. So when you walk in the door or when you come on the screen, however they're doing it, then you have to look professional from the first minute. They're going to, the first few seconds, they are going, even the visual of you, the way you carry yourself and your facial expressions and your eye contact, all of the things you look, you're dressed professionally and so forth. At any rate, all of it gives an impression right away. And of course, impressions can be overcome, but not usually and not easily. You're polite, you're respectful, but totally professional. Okay. So as I say, you set that pretty quickly. Now you want to make eye contact with them. Pretty much use eye contact pretty much the whole time. Now, if they have more than one person in the room, which sometimes happens, then the eye contact could be with the interviewer, could also be looking over at one of your fellow interviewees. It depends on that. Anyway, for sure, use the interviewer's name, ideally somewhere very early in the interview. Okay, so if you're talking about something really important to yourself, then using their name connects it up even to that more important thing, which is kind of a psychological, I wouldn't say trick, but a kind of a strategy that can help. But for sure, use their interviewer's name exactly, I mean, at least once is what I'm trying to say, but early on in the contact. Also, it helps you remember it if you say it out loud. All right, so one thing for sure to remember is that you're there. One thing that can build your confidence is the reason you're there is because you're being seriously considered. Out of all the thousands and thousands of people they have looked at, then the few hundred that they interview includes you. And so you're now at the point where now out of the say 5 to 700 they interview, maybe 150, 200 are going to be accepted. So you have a really good shot at that point, and they are seriously considering you. At any rate, obviously being on time, look the part. I said carry the documents in a portfolio. I mentioned that before. I think these are all pretty obvious. I did say you're attentive. They're going to observe you when you're answering, but also how do you react when a fellow applicant is speaking, if you're in a group setting, right? Because this shows respect, okay? And then if they say something you want to later refer to, or if the questioner asks something that you want to refer to later, this shows you're fully engaged and that you're not just thinking about yourself. You're also concerned about each other. So afterward, okay, for sure send a thank you letter. I can't tell you how important this is. A lot of times they don't get thank yous, and so you want to make sure that you cross that T, dot that I. All right, so when you as soon as you leave, you don't want to be taking notes while you're there, unless there's something really specific you need to write down, and anybody in their right mind would write it down. But normally, you are not taking notes. You're just attentive with your hands in your lap. Use your portfolio if necessary. But as soon as you leave, write down notes about as many things as you can remember. Certainly the name of the interviewers and some of the topics you covered. So when you write your thank you letter, you can make it specific to the interview. Okay. So you possibly could be admitted based on the interview, but a lot of times they're going to put you on a whole list to see what the rest of the pool looks like, because obviously they're interviewing a lot of people. They may really, really like you, but they want to see what all the choices are. So at any rate, so if you do get put on hold, then you can send in supplementary materials, which is kind of cool. Okay. So if you have any other academic or extracurricular things that you couldn't fit into your application, then you could write a little one-page description and send that in as a supplement to your application. So you can do that other times anyway, but for sure, if you're put on hold, there's a good chance to beef up your chances a little bit. Okay, so there's something called the STAR interview, all these kind of cutesy things people come up with. I am going to be quiet and let you read it because it's pretty self-evident, I think. So it's kind of like the what and the where and the why and the results kind of thing. Okay. At any rate, this is especially useful for answering tough questions, they think, because it gives you a chance to break it down into pieces. So here's an example of that technique. So here's the question. Tight deadline. What did you do? Maybe anybody there would like to contribute. That would be fun if you had a situation. Sometimes I'm face to face with people doing this and I can have hands and they can talk about it. Anybody have a situation where they were under a tight deadline and they thought that might be something they want to talk about? Anybody? Always fun to have your participation. That's okay. Don't want to put you on the spot. Okay, so this particular situation is, of course, you're on the deadline, but what was your specific deadline? What was it? Please don't talk about a paper being due. Try to talk about things that aren't what everybody else could talk about. Try to talk about something that has an opportunity to show your unique experiences if you possibly can. Okay, so what was the situation and what were you supposed to do that was, why was it on deadline? What were you supposed to do? Why was it important? Okay, and then, of course, what did you actually do and how it worked out? So this is kind of the things to think about. Okay, so here's an example. So here's another one that was about the time. What about a group project and you had somebody in there you really didn't like? They rubbed you the wrong way, made it hard to concentrate, hard to cooperate, but obviously you have to handle that. Now, working in medicine, you're going to have patients you don't like. You're going to have colleagues you don't like, and you have to work with what you've got. If you're in an operating room and you don't like the person who's handing you your instruments, tough bananas. You've got to learn to productively and positively deal constructively with people, regardless of where they're coming from and how you feel about them subjectively. At any rate, so maybe you could think of something like that. Anybody have something like that they'd like to mention? I'd love it if anybody wanted to toss something in. If you do, just feel free to unmute. Okay, so of course the situation, what was it about? What were you supposed to be doing working with this person? Sometimes the person you don't like doesn't matter much, but sometimes it's vital to the success. Okay, what did you actually do to deal with that particular thing? Not just how did you do the task that you were at hand, but how did you do it in the context of the fact that you were dealing with somebody who was actually problematic on your team? Okay, and how did it all work out? All right, so at any rate, 5 essential tips. We've had tips here, but here come some more. Okay, so at any rate, most of these are kind of self-evident. We got these from like the AMC website and other websites that involve the things that you need to think about. So what are they looking for? Obviously skill, obviously brains, obviously character, but also maturity. I mean, can you deal with difficult situations? One thing you find out when you're doing all the many clinical hours they require, like a minimum of 100, 150. Most people have got several hundred clinical hours, like shadowing and similar things. Okay, so if you are there dealing with really difficult situations, you're in OR, ER, something with the doctor and the team when they're giving bad news to a patient, their families, whatever, to show you have the maturity to actually say, yes, I can deal with this. I want to be a doctor. This is not going to daunt my goals. Okay. And empathy, can you show you actually care about what's happening with the patients? Believe me, I've had many, many doctors in my life. And boy, empathy is a very important variable of whether I respect what they say to me, whether I'm more likely to follow their instructions, also whether I'm likely to reach out to them with follow-up questions. If they're not showing any kind of empathy to me or understanding, then I'm not even going to be as good a cooperative patient as you might wish. So empathy is important, and some people have it naturally, some people can cultivate it. Obviously, critical thinking. You have to be able to analyze complicated situations, and you have to do that on the spot. Also, interpersonal skills. When you're in an interview, one thing you definitely can show is interpersonal skills, how you interact with the situation, how you react. You have, smile, not smile, whatever, serious, and other people in the room or not. You have chance to show how you can deal with questions, how you can ask questions. Lots of opportunities to show interpersonal skills in that situation. Okay, so here is a role play situation. Okay. So again, I would love it if one of you would chime in and offer your own experience. I'll be quiet and let you read this. Please, please, please. I love it when you guys participate. Makes it so much more fun. Take a chance. I'm sure you can visualize. Some of you have probably already done this actually, or already taken blood samples. Mislabeled. Oh dear, oh dear.
We have one student that's going to
Sure. Unmute and go for it.
Yeah, I was thinking that I would explain to the patient about like some of the how free I guess to start off by explaining the situation, being honest about the fact that the the blood sample was mislabeled, and then also talk about like next steps and potentially about like if we can schedule a different appointment or a different time in accordance with their schedule. And then
Right.
also trying to figure out like if it's possible to do it within that session if the patient has a time constraint. Because
Right.
sometimes if you do take another blood sample, if it could be like detrimental to the patient just based on like how recovery periods go, even after doing blood tests and such. So
Right.
just taking all these kinds of variables into consideration, as well as like the patient's anxieties with whether or not it could happen again or just with needles in general and
Yeah.
such. So just trying to figure out different things, I guess.
That's excellent. Have you ever been in any remotely comparable situation?
Not really, no.
I'll tell you the truth, having had many, 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 many blood samples taken, it's extremely rare. I might even take the opportunity to say, this is so rare. I'm really happy that we have a system such that we can catch a mistake right at the beginning and it doesn't have to impact anything about treatment, whatever. That's very good that we caught that. And, sorry that you have taken it, et cetera. Very well. Thank you so much. That was great. Okay, so, and these are some things about ethics. So I'll let you read this one over. Hopefully somebody would like to tackle this one. Okay, a little bit more complicated situation. Interesting. Anybody want to take a stab at this one?
I guess I can try again here.
Oh, sure. Thank you for being brave. What, by the way, where are you in your process? Are you undergraduate, already med school? Where are you along the way?
I'm an undergraduate student, so
Ah,
first year.
great.
Um,
All right. You're looking way ahead. That's great.
yeah,
Okay.
I guess in regards to this situation, I would first like question the interviewer whether or not like either of the sons are the patient's power of attorney, like medical power of attorney, like are they do they have the
Yeah.
right to make that decision on the
Right.
patient's behalf if they are not deemed competent enough to do so. Also, I would question like apparently the man is confused and unable to recognize his family. So
Mhm.
just kind of going into my decision making kind of skills, um, just like demonstrating competency and such like that. Um, and then also trying to see if um, why like try to walk them through and ask them why they feel like and like amputating the below the knee is helpful and such and like trying to explain why that can be helpful and also understanding like or potentially explaining to the patient or their power of attorney about like what could that mean for their career, especially if using their legs is very important, especially like as if they work in a factory or just like other kinds of situations.
Sure. Well, the fact that he's confused and unable to recognize family suggests he probably doesn't have a job. However, he may be in a personal situation in which having a leg or not having a leg, could matter. But the thing is, if they don't get it amputated, it might just fall off anyway if it's badly gangrenous or something. But I like the idea that you're going ahead and talking to the sons. That shows a lot of sensitivity because it may be that each of them is having some kind of knee-jerk reaction, or it may be that each of them has something, something useful, relevant to their father's feelings and history, or whatever, as you say, that would be helpful. And then either one of them might wind up convincing the other. Ideally, of course, as you point out, ahead of time, this man has gotten his power of attorney, right? I'm blanking on the name of it. I have one myself. The instructions, for when you have not competent to answer your own questions or take care of yourself. Also to designate someone. If there's nobody designated, then the two sons kind of, I don't know, weigh out equally or something. But ideally, the father would be closer to one or have somebody designated to make a decision like that. I would encourage you guys, young as you are, whatever medical, I'm part of Kaiser, other people have other medical situations and insurance and whatever, strongly encourage you to go ahead and have that all filled out. These days, it's not just do not resuscitate. They ask you so many questions, but at least they're going to try to satisfy your needs in every which way possible if you're not able to answer those questions yourself. I think this is a very interesting challenge question here. Thank you for participating. Anybody else want to chime in, ask a question, or make a contribution here?
I'd like to add something.
Go for it. Yes.
Something that wasn't really mentioned is informing the patient or the sons about this is the last option. And most people don't say last option unless that's strictly the last option.
Right.
And many doctors, because it does say that you are a doctor working on a surgical ward, have seen it all, or seen a lot of these cases, especially with amputations. And so I would assume that it is the last option. They've looked through everything. So there is a good amount of information that they know of why this needs to be done and why it is the last option. I know that Joan, you talked about maybe it's gangrene and it's going to fall off anyway. And that comes with challenges if it does come off on its own. And that might even end up with this man dying. So there is a lot of information that can be given to family members. I know that like your son might not know what's going on with you. And so informing the sons of what's going on and so they have all their information to give to their father. Especially if he's confused, having that like relayed over and over to him can help sometimes with him understanding the situation.
Yeah. Well, both of you make such very, very good points, very insightful and thoughtful and caring. I see that it says at the very beginning, requires a leg amputation. So presumably the stakes are high. But I think the sons, who are both going to be pretty shocked by all of this, maybe they didn't expect any of that to happen, then being able to talk to them about the information, giving them the knowledge they need to make informed choices, obviously, helps a lot. Hopefully they don't get into fistfights like brothers do. Just kidding. I have seen a lot of families where brothers aren't on speaking terms, so it can be a delicate situation. So your own maturity and sensitivity in handling the situation could also come into it. Anyway, well done. Thanks, you guys, for participating. Okay, so at any rate, as far as all the pieces that applying for medical school, now we're going back to applying for med school, not just getting clinical experience, but also, of course, you want to have good grades. Of course, you want to have good MCAT scores. And by the way, you probably realize that the MCAT score counts more than the grades. In fact, several times more for most medical schools. This is their baby. AMC supervise, in other words, the medical schools themselves, who constitute AMC, they create the what's on the test, how it's tested, how it's graded, all that. And it correlates well with performance in medical school. So it's definitely their baby, and they care a lot about that score. So you want to get the highest score you can get, even if you have to take it several times, which is perfectly fine. Also, the 15 activities and experiences, several of which you need like a year and a half of, like the clinical and the volunteering and the research and so on. Obviously, leadership, doctors are leaders. Service medicine is a service profession. I can't stress enough how important these letters of recommendation, some call them letters of evaluation, are. They require different numbers, 2 or 3, maybe 5, but when you ask those people for those letters, look them in the face and make sure you trust them. I recommend, even for the people who are way early in the process, start cultivating relationships with faculty because they have to know you well enough to write a recommendation. It's not like at some point you hand them a resume and a personal statement and they write from that. Not at all. You want them writing about things that they know about you, right? This is because they know you and they know you well. So starting on early on, you go after class. Go to their office hours. Go, or serve on a committee, volunteer to tutor or TA in their class. Do research with them. All those things help them get to know you. Your skill, your ability, your creativity, reliability, all the wonderful things you're trying to have the schools know about you. The recommenders, you want them to be in a really good position to argue your case before the Court of Medical Schools. And so this is something you want to make sure you give them a chance to do that. And so never too early to start that. Now, I have to tell you, I mentioned that I undergraduate at Harvard. I was always a good student. That was part of how I got in. Testing, I was kind of naturally good at it. Who knows why? I came from kind of, so to speak, Podunk Junction, Oklahoma. I didn't know anything. I was a good student, good test taker, but I didn't know the ropes. Those, prep school kids were running circles around me and all that stuff. But I have to say, by being curious, I very naturally would go after these big lecture classes. I would still go down and talk to the professor because I had questions, go to their office hours. Bless their hearts, these like Nobel Prize winning people, they kept their office hours. I was kind of amazed. But what happened as years went by is I'm expressing my interest with them, and they're very respectful. They call me Miss Martin. They loan me books. I wind up doing research with them. And little did I know, ultimately, that they were going to be people who could write recommendations for me. That wasn't what I was thinking about. I was just following my natural instincts. But now if you're the kind of the person who's not forward like I always was, but maybe not as hesitant, a little bit hesitant about going forward like that, you need to do that, to step forward, get those people to know you well enough to write those recommendations. I have helped hundreds and hundreds of people with this process, and I'm here to tell you I have seen a lukewarm recommendation kill an otherwise really good application. Perspective, I told you I was in the psych department at UCLA in the grad school there, and one of the students I was helping later didn't get in. I expected her to get in. And I so happened that one of the faculty members I knew was on the admissions committee. So I was saying to him, what the heck? Why was she not admitted? And he said, well, I'm not supposed to do this. Be quiet about it. Showed me one of the letters. It said, well, she had several of my courses and got A's in all of them. So I guess she's all right. Oh my gosh, kiss of death. You don't want that person should have refused to write it. They should have said, I don't really know you well enough to write it. Okay. That was not kind of that person to do that. But when you ask people for recommendations, you believe they know you well enough, but you ask them face to face and you watch their body language. Do you believe from the eye contact and the way they talk and lean forward as opposed to look sideways or whatever? You want to know that they, rather than hesitating and hemming and hawing, and you could say, you know what, that's okay. I do have other people I could ask. Please don't feel, I know you have so many, blah, blah, blah. Or as opposed to they say, oh, thank you for asking. I'd be honored. I really believe you'd make a great medical student, whatever. You want the person in your corner. And so face to face, look for how they're going to respond to that. Personal statement for medical school, 5,300 characters, including spaces. This is a process of writing that can take weeks. Talking to people who know you. Most people don't know what's unique or outstanding about themselves, not just achievements, but about themselves. It's a personal statement. It's about them as a person. Until you get way at the end at the interview, you never have a chance to show that you're not just your list of experiences and activities. Okay, this is you as a person, your motivations, your passions, your experience, your relevant failures and successes. This is a chance to do that. So when you first start talking to people who know you, getting ideas, you know, people surprise you sometimes that's special. They go, are you kidding? That's wonderful. You go, oh, okay. We don't know ourselves sometimes that well to know what's special about ourselves. But at any rate, when you start writing down ideas and you do drafts and show it to people, over time, you gradually hone it to what you want. Eventually, it's perfect in terms of grammar and writing and, what you want to say and fits the space and all that good stuff. And I beg of you, please don't use AI for this. I mean, AI can help you along the way, maybe a little bit, but please do not depend on AI to write it for you, because no matter how good AI gets, it isn't you, despite what some people think. So, anyway, I won't go into that right now. It's obviously a moving target, as they say, as far as how well it does a job of portraying what you want it to portray. But I would beg of you to try to do the old-fashioned way when it comes to personal statement. Okay, maybe they could write up your activities, experiences. I don't know. Okay, I'm not going to go there. Meanwhile, next slide is the 17 core competencies. Now, these, up until last year, there were 15. Now they have 17. And this breaks down. These are all the different kinds of things the medical schools are looking. They want you to have all of these things, okay? Easiest is over on the right, human behavior, living system. This is the science part. Demonstrate that by the courses you take, by how you do on those three science sections on the test. Of the 4 sections, 3 are science-based. Doing well on the MCAT test shows your science ability too. Okay, and then thinking and reasoning, critical reasoning, part of that, the part of the test that's the critical analysis and reasoning skills has a chance to show the critical thinking to a certain extent. Also, some of your coursework, some of the things your recommenders can say about that. Scientific inquiry, quantitative reasoning, this you can show through all that year and a half of lab research you did, like actually what they call wet lab, bench work. That is important. Written communication, well, when you're writing part of your essay, that's definitely going to show that. Some of these ones on the left are, somewhat more ephemeral. How do you show, well, commitment to learning and growth? Well, you took in hard classes, you did well in them, you kept at it. Cultural awareness, humility. That's part of your volunteer work, can be dealing with other cultures. You can show some there. A lot of these things are kind of a little bit hard to demonstrate yourself, but ideally, some of your recommenders can touch some of these bases. At any rate, when it comes down to things I mentioned before, the resilience and adaptability, that's where you have an opportunity in your personal statement to talk about a flop. You fell flat on your face, it was a failure, it was a misstep, it was a misjudgment or a bad decision, whatever. Own it. That shows maturity, grit, and what you learn from it, most importantly. At any rate, that's one really good way to show resilience and adaptability. At any rate, as far as service, you have to have hundreds of hours of service, volunteer work. And that's, by the way, not just checking a box. You have to have a serious ongoing commitment to something you care about. All right, onward. So as far as the timeline for medical school, now this is if you're going to medical school, some of you are way past this, some of you are nowhere near thinking about this. This whole thing is predicated on the idea people used to sort of put all this together third year of their undergraduate years. Okay, so it's kind of put together that way. But most people these days, I would say probably 75% of the people who are accepted into medical school actually have taken a gap year or two afterwards. They actually not only accept it, they recommend it, the schools. And so you have a chance to get more maturity and grounding, more experience, clinical research, cultural travel, all kinds of things you could use a year or two between to make your application better. Now, that said, you've got 25 or 30% who don't have the gap years. That's perfectly fine. But old days, everybody pretty much went straight in unless something weird happened in their lives. Okay, as far as the timeline, you've got to take the test early on. As I said, I didn't mention this before, but you could take the test 3 times in any given testing year, which is January to September. 4 times in 2 consecutive years, okay? So people think if I take it more than once, I'm going to look bad. Not at all. This is a killer test. It's a highly speeded, tricky, nasty, cruel brute of a test. And one of the reasons that we are in business is because we can help people beat this thing. But at any rate, you need to get yourself as well prepared as you can be, which is going to be 2 or 3 months of preparation. Now, down here in the lower left, end of second year is probably, we have a slide somewhere about classes you need, prerequisite classes to do well on the MCAT. If you've got those done, most people finish those the first couple of years. Then you could do that summer. You could start studying for the test. Don't study for the test until you've got the sciences covered, because otherwise you're just throwing away practice materials. So get yourself your courses under your belt. Then you can start studying how it's tested on this test and all the things and getting your timing together, all the many things that go into it. So that's going to take several months of intensive practice. So you have to devote that at a time you've got that to spare. You've got to have at least like a few hours a day. Can't do it full time, you go nuts. But a few hours a day with a day or two off here and there for sure. Anyway, then the year that you're thinking about applying, the fall, say it would be the junior year here or third year, then they're going to release the test dates for the coming test year, January to September, in September, October. This last year, I think it was October 2nd, as I recall. But at any rate, they will release the dates, and then a few days later, they open up registration. Now, up until this last year, they would release a chunk of them at a time, the early dates and later. But now they release all of the dates at once. So when you've decided when works well for your schedule to take the test, you want to be already signed up, everything filled out online, ready to push your finger on that button, boom, because a lot of people want the same dates you do. So be ready for that. And also do it early enough that if need be, you could take it 2 or 3 times, because anybody can have a bad day. Anybody can, no matter how well you've been doing or how well prepared or promising you are. But anybody can also, besides having a bad day, nobody can have a good enough day to get a high score. It can't happen. You cannot fluke your way into a high score, and they know that. So if you ever get a really high score, they're going to notice that and pay attention to that. Either that's the one they'll look at or they'll average with the others, but it's really important to give yourself that time. Now, if you come over more to the right over here, it's talking about taking your test in the spring. Okay, in between is all the things like getting your recs and your personal statements and your activities and all that stuff put together. Is a lot to do. But anyway, you start getting yourself ready to take the test. And it says here in the middle at the top, June at the latest. For sure at the latest, because most of them open up open up their applications in June, okay? And so you would like to be there with everything ready for them at that point. Okay, when you turn this in, AMCAS is going to put it all together for them. Takes them time. It's like a month before they get it to the schools. So you have to back up. If they open in June, you get AMCAS is not going to have it until like a month before that. Then the test takes a few weeks to get that score. If you want to take it 2 or 3 times, back up, back up. You can see how you have to really plan ahead if you want to be there when the doors first open. Make that great first impression and have every possible opportunity. Or rolling admissions, for heaven's sakes. Over here at the Way Right October, they're already starting to accept students. So you don't want that. At any rate, so you get everything submitted April, May to AMCAS. They put it all together for you. And only when they have everything will they send it to the schools. Okay. And then you've got the secondaries. If you've never heard of that, it's even more writing. No other graduate study has anything remotely as demanding as getting ready to apply to med school. So each individual school, it's almost like a written interview, so to speak, because they've got their own things they want to ask you questions about. Each school has the questions that they care about, their strengths, their research interests, their mission, what they are interested in, the kind of students they're looking for. So you study that, you research that. How do I make that school like me? What about me is particularly appealing to you? You're perfect for me, I'm perfect for you. So anyway, they send those out. Some schools send them to everybody applying. Some only send them to a chosen number. But if you get the secondaries, you're always going to have some of those, I expect. At any rate, and then come the interviews. If we say only a few hundred of those, that comes way at the end of the process. Everything else precedes that. Okay, so what do we got here? Oh, I mentioned the calendar. This is the 2026 calendar. I got this from the AMC website, January to September. And you can see there's only a few days per month when they give it, right? And so you have to be ready. Think of all those tens of thousands of people who want to take the test on these dates. So if you want to take it, like say in January, so that you have time to take it again in February and March and have everything in time, give yourself time. Takes pressure off too, takes stress off. But at any rate, so you plan ahead, you've got everything filled out and ready to go. So you're ready when they open it up, boom, you take it. So that's that. Anyway, so you got the whole year to look at this point. Used to be just the first few months. Okay, then one thing we have that's really cool on our website, there's a freebie for you, the Medical School Management Tool. What this is kind of like a glorified spreadsheet. So there's a place in this website free for you. Everything has a place to go. All of the different aspects of your application. All of these many balls in the air, you've got to have a place to park them. And so you can have your own spreadsheet or tool, but this is a wonderful tool. Students love this. So you get in there, you have a place to put things. It's got recommendations and reminders and all that. And then also, by the way, if some opportunity comes up for a fellowship or a internship, then you could go in there and you could download a PDF and you'll have it all set to go. At any rate, that's a tool that's free to you if you want it. At any rate, be ready. Obviously, having that tool ready, as I just mentioned, the management tool. That way, if you do have opportunities that come up, then you are ready to go ahead and submit for things. Or even having it all together makes your appointments with your pre-health advisor way more productive and so forth. At any rate, so be ready, ready for anything. Think ahead, basically. There you go. Another tool we have that's a freebie is the flashcard app, right? So you could hundreds and hundreds of science concepts in there that you can study. Another fun freebie. At any rate, so all kinds of ways we can help you beyond just today. Hopefully we've helped you today. We can help you get better grades. We have tutors in over 80 subjects. Our highly qualified teachers can help you. We have the courses we teach, everybody's specialized. OChem teacher, GChem teacher, physics, bio, psych soc. As a writer editor, I teach the critical analysis and reasoning skills section. That's the one that's not at all about science. It's liberal arts, reading skills, thinking skills, critical analysis, all that stuff. Okay, as I said, we can help you write applications and help you therefore get into a better school. Now, again, here's our contact information. The QR code here you can ignore. We were doing a survey, but that's over now, so you can ignore that. At any rate, again, you have the contact information if you want to reach out. Now, I notice we're just like a minute from the end of the schedule time. So if anybody has to leave, I certainly understand that. And I want to thank you for coming. Might as well stop sharing at this moment. And thank you for coming. I hope that your time was well invested. And also wish you luck. Good luck on your studies and on your exam, your applications, all of it. And we're here for you if there's anything we can do for you. And as I say, you're welcome now to stay and ask questions as long as anybody would like. I'm ready for you. Or you have to leave or you don't think of something till later, tonight, tomorrow, next week, next year. I'm yours as long as we're both still on the planet. As long as there's still a planet. Sorry about that. Anyway, also certainly take care of yourselves out there. Lots of flu, COVID still floating around. So be careful. All right, guys.
I'm just getting over the flu myself. We did have a question from a rum who said, hi, how would a group virtual interview be set up? And do you introduce yourself as soon as you join or wait until the interviewer introduces themselves?
That is a good question. It may be the format of how that individual interviewer is setting it up. Okay. But it's their interview, so I kind of would let them set the tone. If they introduce themselves right away, which not be surprising, but not. But if they look at you smiling and say, you could go ahead and say, "Hi, I'm so and so. Nice to meet you." You could. I don't think you should have a set routine on that. Again, it's being sensitive to the situation and reading the room, so to speak. And I think new individual interviewers may handle it somewhat different also. A good question. I love it when people ask questions, partly because always get asked questions I haven't been asked before, but also I like the fact that you're taking it seriously enough to be asking questions. Very good. Any other? I don't mean to put you off. That was just. Oh, by the way, for the people in the chat that are thinking, oh, you're absolutely very grateful. It was my pleasure. Oh, here's somebody. I said I could not read questions in the chat, but somebody wrote something in here. Let me see. Ba-do, 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 ba-do. Advanced directive. Thank you. I told you I couldn't look at the chat when I was presenting. That was what I was looking for. Advanced directives on a tip of the tongue thing, right? So, I don't know. Are there any questions that were in here that you think I should address? Kira, let's see.
Someone asked if it's competitive to get into medical schools in the Caribbean.
Oh, what a good question. In our presentation about the MCAT test itself, and we also have a whole presentation on the medical school application timeline, whole hour on that. In there, we actually have that mentioned. Because if your grades or your scores or whatever are not 100% like competitive enough to get where you'd really ideally like to go, the Caribbean medical schools are actually an option. They are medical schools. You graduate, you have an MD, okay? And so the important thing is to get the residency afterward. No matter where you go, when you get the residency, then you're in the groove. Whether you're getting a DO or an MD or where you went to school, getting that residency puts you on the path toward practice. Now, in the Caribbean medical schools, since they're less well known, less prestigious, only the top percent of them will have that opportunity. But I'll tell you that the deans and the top graduates there are going to make sure that their best graduates are going to have those opportunities. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in business anymore. I mean, somebody has to succeed, right? So if you do go there, you just make sure you're absolutely at the top. I mean, even graduating medical school these days is already, I mean, wow, as you know, that's quite an incredible achievement. But the Caribbean medical schools being less well known and that it's definitely an option, especially if your credentials are not quite as good as you would like them to go to the schools you'd really ideally like to choose. Also, you get to be in the Caribbean. That's kind of nice. Or Caribbean, however you say it.
I also always debate that.
Oh, sorry.
I'm
Who,
gonna-
who was talking? I missed it.
I said I always debate that. The
Of
Caribbean
course.
versus Caribbean. Karandeep also asked a question and said, "Hello, what is the best way to land a professional clinical position like a medical assistant or a patient care tech?"
So you're talking now beyond like more the ones that you have to train for and get paid for. You're talking like that, right? Or EMT or CNA or something like that. Those positions, the medical schools like them. They have a little bit more feather in your cap because obviously not everybody can do that. But not everybody can do it if there aren't that many positions. But if you want to do one of those, it shows an extra dose of commitment because you have to train for it and you have to be tested for it and you have to be showing up. Like if you're an EMT, you have to commit to doing a whole year of it or whatever. So there's that. As far as as far as how to apply for individual ones, that's going to some extent depend on which position and where you're applying. Obviously, the shadowing, these are things that at the individual hospitals is where you would ask there. Now, do you guys have like mentors or people that help you, or do you have pre-health advisors? I know you guys my gathering is that you guys are from different schools. Is that right? It's not just all one school. Because at your individual college, there very well may be a pre-health or a pre-med advisor, or your faculty members too, right? They may well, having been teaching for a long time, they may have some knowledge and connections about that. Also, God, Google. I'm a total Google fan. You can, I mean, obviously you have to take some of it with a grain of salt, but some of the nuts and bolts are right there. Like, what does it take to get a shadowing at XYZ hospital or whatever? Anybody want to contribute their own knowledge about this or experience? I'd love to hear from you if you do. What I'm saying is it's not a one size fits all. There's some um, a aspects of that vary somewhat in terms of position, where, and so forth. when we do the other presentations, the one for the MCAT test itself and for the medical school application timeline, we touch on these in a little bit more detail. For example, how to go about the clinical and, and all that good stuff.
I have another question for you.
Uh-huh.
Nadira asked and said, "Hi, thank you for your presentation. We're asked about, sorry, my screen just shot down. Oh, when we're asked about conflict resolution, can we use a work-related experience, especially if it involves management?
Of
Or does that
course,
mean
of course. When you're talking about any of these hypothetical situations, they're looking at, first of all, that you can think on your feet, that you have wisdom and experience. And so, I mean, if it's a medical thing, that's ideal, but not necessary. So if you have work experience in which it was a research experience or some other kind of work experience, and they're very germane because there's universalities to some of these things, working with a, crummy colleague or having to give bad news to somebody or any of those kind of challenges, then you could definitely pull that from even your volunteer experience. You coach a little league team or whatever. There's a lot of opportunity to show who you are. It doesn't have to be that you're in a hospital having that happen. I hope that answers the question.
I think it answered it beautifully.
Okay.
Another question for you is, how do you talk
Sure.
about failures in a way that's more light?
Good question. Most of us think, I don't want to talk about failure. I want to tell them the good stuff about me. It's such a natural instinct, of course. But the chance to do it, that's what I'm mentioning the personal statement. 5,300 characters, including spaces. That's basically a couple of pages, okay? And that is not a whole lot of time. Plus, once they get it, you're lucky they give you 5 or 6 seconds of looking at it. So the very first paragraph, by the way, we have a whole session on personal statements and recommendations if you want. But at any rate, there's a lot to be said about that. But for sure, you're lucky. If the numbers aren't great, they might not even look at the personal statement, truthfully. But most of them will at least take a look. But you're talking about a few seconds. They've seen thousands, they can size it up pretty quickly. So the very first paragraph, you need to grab them by the collar and make them want to read it, right? I am somebody you really want. You don't want to be confident, but not arrogant. That's a big turnoff, okay? But you're passionate and why here's what you don't want to tell them stuff I'll say one thing I tell students, don't tell them anything they already know. Like, I'm applying to medical school. Okay, don't waste characters. Okay, the reason I'm passionate about becoming a doctor is, and some experience from who knows where that was, who knows, a family member or just who knows what it could be. Or it could even be the failure experience itself was that. Maybe the whole story is about some really awful experience that sort of turned you around, got your motivation or your maturity or your goals more focused, and then that really put you on the path. That could be it. That's not most people's story. But if you have something that you feel like maybe it's disadvantageous to talk about, I can tell you they actually like it if you go ahead and do that. So maybe you have your paragraphs in there, if you think 5 paragraph essay, so to speak, of introductory paragraph that's like, wow, that's really cool. What else do you have to tell me? And then you have the specifics in the paragraphs. But you've got some paragraphs, but maybe one of those paragraphs deals head on with something, like one of the worst days of my life was when that happened. And I fell flat on my face. I can't believe that happened. I made that decision or whatever it was. Who knows? You know what I'm saying? But be honest and upfront about it because everybody fails. And they know that. Them too, by the way. And the fact that you could even acknowledge it is already a huge plus. Because as you know, even grown-up people, most of them have a really hard time acknowledging failure or acknowledging anything negative about themselves publicly, especially when the stakes are so high of getting into med school, for heaven's sake. So you acknowledge it, and even the interview too, up front, get ahead of the game, say, you know, if you've looked at the rest of my application, you could see what happened. Or, not everybody realizes it's about me, but I really did have a hard time with such. Whatever. You could present it as a positive, shows maturity. Second of all, you didn't let it get you down, or at least not permanently. You picked yourself up, you kept going. This shows real grit, motivation, determination. That's awesome, because everybody's going to get knocked down. But what do you do after that? And then finally, and importantly, is what did you learn? I think I said earlier that every failure is a learning experience. And so if you can turn it into a positive, in the end, it made you a better person. It taught you something important about life or, your character or whatever. It was something that was a very important learning experience for you. And you wouldn't have had that without that experience. At any rate, that's kind of the approach you take. Turn a negative into a positive, you know.
I want to be mindful of your time, but we have 4 more questions.
My time is yours. It's
Some
your
of them
time.
are a
You
little
do what you want.
short.
For me, I'm here as long as you want. Okay, keep going.
All right, but I think we'll end with Alexis's question just for the chat.
And you
And
said you had four more. Are they in the chat? Or should
they
I?
are in the chat. Juan asked, how should applicants tailor their answers across schools with different missions?
Okay, there are some opportunities to tailor your applications, okay? Now, when you're turning everything into AMCAS and they're putting it all together and sending it to the schools, there are some opportunities. You go to the AMC website and read all the particulars, but there are ways in which you can aim certain things at certain schools, certain recommenders for that school, certain personal statement for the other school. In other words, you can, to some extent, tailor who you send what. Good question.
And then Abby asked if you had any recommended books to read for potential med students or lifelong learners of the human life and treating pathologies.
Wow, of human life and treating pathology. What a fascinating question. I'd have to think about that one. If you really want to know, I mean, you could ask other people too, professors or whoever, but if you want to email me that, I'll give it some thought and come back to it. On the top of my head, I'm like thinking about five things at once here. But for sure, I'd actually like to know that myself, and I bet I could come up with some good ones. But if you want to email me, I'd be happy to give you a response. Good question.
One of my secondaries asked for what was a book that I've read over the last year that's changed how I view medicine and life.
Oh,
And
wow.
my answer was When Breath Becomes Air. And if anyone's not read it, I strongly recommend it.
Oh, so you have a recommendation. Good,
Yeah,
good.
it's about a doctor who switches between being a doctor and being a patient because he ends up having cancer. And so you get
Wow.
to see two perspectives and the differences between him becoming a doctor and being in his program as a surgeon, and then him also seeing himself as this kind of patient
Wow.
role and having to take a step back from
Right.
the way he's kind of seeing himself as indestructible. And
That's
it's
cool.
probably the most amazing book ever, so I strongly recommend it.
I'm going to make a note and do it myself, read it myself. But anyway, if anybody wants more recommendations, I'm happy to look into it when breath becomes air. Okay,
Oh
so
yeah, strongly recommend
okay,
email Miss Martin, ask her. She probably will
yeah,
come up
okay,
with some great books as well.
yeah, okay. So I was also going to say I think every doctor should be required to be a patient in a hospital because the perspective, you can get arrogant, you could get dismissive, you could, not realize what they're going through. And I mean, obviously, a lot of people have, but just somehow or other give you some perspective on that because you're true. It is a very, very different perspective. So I'm looking forward to taking a look at that. Thank you.
So
Anybody else want
the
to make it?
easier
Yeah.
question, Juan asked, how many shadowing hours should an applicant be getting?
Okay. Now the clinical hours of all of the many things they want you to do, like the 15 activities experiences and, year and a half of volunteer experience and a year and a half of research experience. But the clinical of all the things they require is the number one most important, obviously. Couple of reasons for that. They want you to make sure you want to be a doctor. If you're doing clinical and you're putting a minimum of 100 to 150 hours into your clinical experience, and most people focus on the shadowing for that. It can be a hospital or a clinic, a hospice, because you want to see the practice of medicine up close and personal. When you've been there and you've got all those dozens of hours and you still want to be a doctor, maybe you idealized it all your life, but you got face to face with it and realized you can't stand the sight of blood or the emotional pressure is too big or whatever. You go, I don't know, maybe not. I mean, you've proven to yourself that, yep, that's what you want. Now you know, and you still do. And you've proven to them that that's what you want to do. Okay. This is a very serious commitment if you're still knocking at their door after all of that experience. And they regard it as the beginning of your medical education. They do regard that as the beginning foundation of your medical school education. So they value that. So all of them are important. Can't not do any of them because it's so competitive. You can't afford not to do all of it. But that's why you have to plan ahead so much. But as far as the clinical, that is their number one thing for sure. As far as how many hours of actually just shadowing as opposed to other things, one thing for sure that we point out in other presentations is that more than volume or number of hours is the diversity. You want to have like 3 or 4 or 5 different fields covered, right? So if you're shadowing in a hospital, you want to do primary care, maybe ER, OR, pediatrics, orthopedics. You want to have different areas that you're shadowing and learning about. So you can have 3,000 hours in one of them. That's not as good as 150 hours in 4 different ones. They're pretty upfront about that. I don't know if I answered, maybe that's not specific enough, but as far as how you break down between shadowing and other kinds of things, right? Then that is something to research, I think, depending on what your goals are. But also, as I said, the prepaid one, I mean, not prepaid, the paid ones like EMT and CNA. Oh, and scribe too. Medical scribe is another one where you're right face to face with medicine. The medical scribe, we have a whole session on medical scribing, by the way, too. All these things we could give you. But at any rate, that's something to talk to Colleen about if you're interested for this group or for your individual schools, pre-med groups or career center or whatever.
We're on our last question,
Yeah,
Alexis.
okay.
And then there was a quick question that I'll throw in here.
Okay.
I got you.
It's up to you.
In regards to interview answers, especially the tell us about yourself, how
boy.
long should your answer be to that question so you don't talk too much? Maybe 60 to 90 seconds.
Yeah. Tell me about yourself. What a horrible question. I mean, I think that's something you have to rehearse, practice for, because that's like, most people are like, what do I say? I mean, you've got to think ahead about that. But I would say, like kind of a minute or so. You don't want to, like, it's almost like the personal statement, except you're saying it. Like, who are you? You know what I'm saying? Or why do you want to go into medicine? So these are things that you have to be able to say succinctly and make them interesting and convincing and, show your passion. But you can do that pretty quickly. As I say, the first few seconds, they size you up anyway, as far as your professionalism and your intelligence and you present yourself as somebody they really want to talk to, or the patient would really feel comfortable talking to and depending on. So, but as far as when you start talking, obviously, if that, heaven help me if that's the first question, but like, who are you anyways? What am I doing here? I hope that's not too vague an answer.
Yeah, I was always recommended the elevator pitch. If you can't say it in an elevator, you're just talking too much.
Yeah, it's true. An elevator pitch, though, you think of an elevator, you think of a minute, 2 or 3 minutes, right? So that's a good way to do it. In business, they definitely talk about the elevator pitch. Okay. So you have to have the whole thing right there for them. And so the best you've got to offer right then and there. But I do think it's in some ways like a spoken personal statement in that sense, because you want all the best stuff right there together.
It's definitely good advice. Okay, last quick question.
Okay.
And I know Abby, I saw your question, but this is the last quick question. I've heard elsewhere that shadowing doesn't count as clinical experience. Should
No,
that
it
be
does.
taken with a grain of salt?
No, it does count. I mean, I've never heard that. I've done doing this for many, many, many years. I've never heard that. Has anybody else heard that? That shadowing doesn't count as clinical experience? It totally counts as clinical experience. And in fact, that's the one we will be, when we talk about the clinical experience necessity in our other presentations, the first thing we talk about is shadowing as an example. I don't know. So, Eben, did you have something you wanted to say about that? I saw you unmuted yourself.
I think that was an accident.
Okay, all right.
Oh, last question. Abby asked what your email.
Well, but before we go there, did anybody, it sounds like nobody had ever heard that before. The person who asked that question, where did you hear that?
I'd be curious about that too.
I mean, you hear all kinds of crazy stuff in the air spoken or on the internet. You got to watch out. I mean, I go on the internet, do research all the time, but boy, you have to be careful. Look at your sources and all that stuff. So I don't believe that's true. I mean, I really don't believe that's true. The schools may want more than just shadowing, but shadowing for sure is important. And that's why you're here today, right? Find out about shadowing.
Definitely nice to find out about shadowing.
You said there was another question.
Abby asked what your email was, and I was wondering if you wanted to just put that last slide up real quick.
Yeah, I will. I'll put it right back. And then you could take a screenshot of it if you want. Hang on a second here.
And if anyone didn't register with that link above, I can repost it. That I'll also send you these slides, and that also has.
Well, if everybody should register. Okay, if you haven't already registered, it's in the chat. So that go to that website. All we really need is your name and email address. Whatever else it asks, name and email address. That way, Colleen can follow up. She can send you the slides. She can send you the discount codes for courses if you want. Also, how to get at all of the other freebies and goodies that we're offering. Anyway, so all of that stuff she's going to send you. But myself, you have to reach out to me if you want to talk to me. And here's my email address right there. Feel free.
Well, I think that's everything. I just wanted to say thank you for Miss Martin for taking the time and even giving us a bunch of extra time to answer everyone's questions. I know that a
I'm
lot of people
It's
were
my job, so to
curious.
speak. I mean, truthfully, I'm kind of a bored teacher, truthfully. I mean, I love teaching. And if you've ever taught anything, you know that if you know something, you want to share it. It's part of the motivation. You just, it's fun to know stuff, but it's even more fun in some ways to share it with other people. So for me, it's a pure pleasure. As long as I have the time, always glad to give it.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much. We're looking forward to possibly seeing you again in another workshop.
That'll be great.
Do
Thank
you
you. Thank
do
you.
all the other workshops, or are you only in
Yep,
certain?
every single one. I've been doing these for a lot of years. So, all the teaching is one thing, but the marketing is kind of fun in a different way because I like to reach out to many, many students and then just give them, obviously it's a marketing tool. They'd like it if you said, oh yeah, I'm going to take a press review course. That's great. Because this is a taste, obviously, of a course that runs 2 or 3 months. But at any rate, yeah, I really enjoy reaching out in these sessions. So I'm not sure. I think I lost the thread there. What did you ask?
Oh, I was just thanking you. And
Yeah.
I asked if you ran the other workshops as well.
Oh yeah, yeah, all of them. Yeah. And also other, if you're interested, like, dental and medical and law and business and academic programs, if you want to get a PhD. Some people do a joint program, like I had a student a few years ago who was getting an MD and an MBA, business and a medical degree, because he wanted to go back to his home country and establish a chain of hospitals. Wow. So some people do joint degrees or whatever. So you might have an academic and a medical, whatever. So I can answer those kind of questions, whatever, basically kind of pretty much anything. If I don't know, I'll find out for you.
Well, amazing. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording.
Okie dokie.
And then